This is episode 321 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Dringmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, I had a whole set of talking points and articles to discuss with you, and then, about 10 o'clock this morning, our esteemed governor, Lujan Grisham, and the PED, Public Education Department, issued their COVID-19 response toolkit for New Mexico public schools, which means these are the rules that our children will be living under, not to mention our teachers will be living under for the foreseeable future as we head back to school next month. And it's not what we would have hoped, at least as the parent of 3 young children, we would have hoped. It's about what we would have expected, but it's...
Does that mean the mask mandate is in there, not to steal your thunder, Mr.
Oh,
Blessing?
absolutely.
Oh, man. Okay. Well, even though I predicted it, but it doesn't mean that I'm happy that that's the case. So
you and the rooster predicted the sun will come up tomorrow too, and that I totally get it. Yes, it wasn't exactly the biggest limb you've ever been out on.
No,
I'm sure,
that's true.
Wally.
Yes.
Now, just to clarify, and we're not going to go through. This is a 29-page document with all kinds of ins and outs and little descriptions of every last jot and tittle that folks will be having to comply with, including our children. The emphasis is heavily towards everyone in elementary schools being required to wear masks. That's a pretty straightforward statement. Everyone, that's through 5th grade, presumably, and that's the general definition of elementary school. So that means teachers, principals, children, the whole 9 yards, which is going to be very tricky for them to enforce on little kindergartners, as my daughter will be in a private school, a Catholic school, but they're going to be requiring private schools. You won't escape. The only escape for this is to homeschool your kids, it would appear.
So, Paul, identical rules as far as or same rules for public schools and private schools. Is that how your initial take on it?
That is the take that the governor definitely is attempting to exert. Mm-hmm. I do believe there could be legal discussion about that,
right,
and we'll see how that shakes out. Now, in terms of junior high and high school, they are going to be verifying vaccine status, but that will impact mask wearing in terms of whether people who work in the school or students have to be wearing a mask during the day. Now, outdoors, that is one of the small kind of nods to reason, is that it doesn't appear that in either the elementary or the junior high grades that they will be required to wear masks out of doors, but visitors to school, heavy emphasis on mask requirements, et cetera, et cetera. Set aside, of course, that children have been very, very limited in their impacts, especially death, of course, from COVID-19 and all the things we've talked about on this podcast, let alone, what determining factor is going to lead us to change policy. I mean, are we going to be in a situation where kids in New Mexico in elementary school and teachers for years to come are wearing masks? I mean, there's going to be potentially at some point in the future a vaccine approved for those younger children, but if you're not inclined to get that vaccine, where does that go? And just a whole slew of questions. But this information became available today, and it's something that I think is going to dominate the news cycle here in New Mexico for a while. And there's protests, by the way, and we listed them at heirsofenchantment.com. I think we need massive opposition to this policy. So I'll be there with my kids protesting on Saturday morning in Albuquerque at Vista del Norte Park. And all that is listed for protests in Albuquerque, Artesia, Carlsbad, Farmington, Las Cruces, Rio Rancho, and Santa Fe, just to get started with regard to the mask mandate. So this is going to be an interesting time.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We will see what happens. New Mexico's protests have been pretty mild and pretty sparse compared to many states, and even compared to many and most other Democrat majority states. So we'll see if that trend continues as well.
Yeah, and according to Burbio.com, which has done a great job of tracking all kinds of various activities involving the schools and COVID, and whether schools have been open or not during COVID, and where the mask requirements are and will stay in the same category. We are one of 7 states in the entire country here in New Mexico, those being Hawaii, California, Washington, New Mexico, New York, Connecticut, and Delaware. So deep blue states, all that are going to be maintaining a mask requirement imposed at the state level. None of our neighbors, including relatively blue Colorado, even Oregon, a very blue state. You just go up and down the Atlantic seaboard, even, blue states in that general area, even Maryland or Maine or Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts. Nobody outside of those handful of states that I mentioned earlier is imposing a statewide mask mandate. But such has been life behind the Berlin Wall here of New Mexico, with the tiny tyrant in charge, Michelle Lujan Grisham.
Yes. And, Paul, I've seen, I mentioned earlier podcast studies about high CO2 levels, particularly in young children. And I don't know, they didn't like the study, so they attacked the methodology. But that seems like that is a big issue. And I've often felt like the thing they don't like to talk about is, guess what, Paul? Maybe it's because I once took an economics class, but there are pros and cons for most anything, strengths and weaknesses, benefits and costs. And one of the costs of masks is your CO2 level may be higher, and that can cause its own problems. And there is not, and this has been the management of COVID broadly in New Mexico. There's not a weighing of these forces. It's like the COVID. It's like Oz and the Wizard of Oz. It's the all-powerful thing, and that's what we're going to take care of. Meanwhile, things beyond COVID that are caused by the policies seem like they get worse and worse. And I certainly hope that our young children don't suffer problems, but there is an indication with science out there and studies that might be the case. So,
yeah. So we'll certainly be following this story, and we'll have full reporting on the Albuquerque protest on Saturday, etc. But that is, you can probably tell from the tone of my voice that I am not happy at all. Not surprised, but not happy. We did, in a happier bit of news, have a very big week in media at the Rio Grande Foundation over the last several days, including a conversation with Fox Business Channel regarding film subsidies. Now, that was a plus and minus. Wally, I'm going to put you on the spot. Did you check out the...
I have not, Paul.
Okay.
You know what, Paul? I am a bad producer and co-host of the show. I didn't check it out. I was actually pretty busy over the weekend, or I think okay. I would have. No, but I will at some point, maybe a day late and $1 short. So
that's all right. Well, it was a conversation about film subsidies, and one of the things, and I appreciate truly, and you can find it on Heirs of Enchantment or the Rio Grande Foundation website. We got a brief hit. Maria Bartiromo was there as the desk anchor, and we talked to reporters, and they were asking about the pluses and minuses of the Hollywood film study subsidies, and they clearly had come in with their storyline intact, which is that Hollywood is leaving California for, not Hollywood, but the film industry is leaving California. Now, if you're in the media and you don't know any better, you might think, oh, this is just another business that's leaving California because their high costs, their safety issues, their regulations, all the kinds of negative things we hear about California and doing business there. Unfortunately, if you actually look at what's going on in New Mexico, we're literally bribing these Hollywood film companies to come to New Mexico to set up shop to the tune of 25 to 35% of what their cost of doing business is. But when you try to explain this to somebody who really has a narrative already set, it's not very easy to get through to them. So the story, unfortunately, is not particularly what I would call clear or illustrative of what's happening in the film industry and what's happening in New Mexico. So I make sure to post below that or associated with the story on heirsofenchantment.com a report from the Legislative Finance Committee that shows that, according to them, the Green Eyeshade folks in the legislature, the total cost of the film industry subsidies is $750 million over 5 years. That is a cost, not a foregone revenue. That is an absolute out-of-pocket cost that they estimate of what these subsidies are costing the state of New Mexico. So it's not a particularly worthwhile program. I guess the silver lining is we get to make California look bad.
Yes, we're beating California. That's good. We're not beating Mississippi and Alabama in things like we used to. So we're going to need somebody to get the one up on. And Paula, yeah, it is interesting when you are asked to comment on a larger story, how sometimes if you don't agree with the premise necessarily, it's pretty tough to turn. It's like a big ship. It's pretty tough to turn it in another direction. I believe me, I've had that experience, and almost anyone has who's talked to the media. But you tried, so you got it's an opener, and explain where it's coming from. And $750 million, if my math is correct, that's $750 million. That's a lot of money. So.
Yeah, no, and it had CNN or some other network been doing the story, they probably wouldn't have contacted anybody for a rational economic perspective. So I do appreciate Fox Business Channel making the call and having us on to talk about it. We also had stories I wrote in the Albuquerque Journal about Martin Heinrich and his attempts to get natural gas stoves and heaters and whatnot banned, and how he's coming after natural gas now in your house. And Patrick Brenner had an article on the Federalist website regarding the spaceport and Richard Branson's use of massive subsidies from the state of New Mexico. Again, we applaud Branson and Bezos for their private entrepreneurial aspect of going to space. We're not among the Luddites or the how dare you do something fun and exciting and innovative instead of spending all your money on poor and needy people. Mm-hmm. Someday I might want to go to space, and maybe you too, Wally. But Patrick took the Richard Branson and the spaceport to task for, of course, the large quantities of New Mexico tax dollars used to finance that project. So it's that national media is always something that we're trying to gain attention for in New Mexico, because unfortunately, too many people don't realize just what is happening here in our state.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a bigger than we'd like to admit percentage don't even know that New Mexico is a state. So
very true. Now, also relating to the spaceport, but just perplexing. Senator Bill Soules, William Soules, Soules, for those who don't know, tweeted a couple pictures actually, of the Las Cruces airport. And it says, 3 stories are told in one pic of the Las Cruces airport the morning after the Virgin Galactic launch. Sunrise over the Oregons is beautiful. Virgin Galactic had a large economic impact on the region. The airport needs to expand. We had to turn away airplanes due to lack of space. Now, these are not your Deltas and your Southwests or your Uniteds.
They're your Cessnas and maybe your King Airs.
Oh yeah. Cessna, I think we're talking small. These are big dollars. Elon Musk is not flying. I don't know what Cessna's offerings are.
No, I'm kidding.
I haven't gone and priced out my private jet, but these are very high dollar private planes. And Sewell's, for those who don't know, he's a Las Cruces area state senator. He introduced in 2021, not long ago at all, this year, a proposal to eliminate all nuclear energy, coal, or gas-fired energy production within New Mexico. All of it, immediately. Sewell's is a radical. He is hardcore pro, all the radical environmental policies. He also had a policy bill that we fought that would have required the state to purchase 75% electric vehicles for their fleet. So that cop getting you for a ticket on the road, I-25, would be a electric vehicle police officer. And Lord knows we have enough problems with crime that we don't need electric cars out there and the expenses that entails.
Yeah, well, and interestingly, if it's a quick chase, an electric cop car is going to do pretty good.
Pretty well.
Assuming it's a Tesla. A long chase, probably not so well.
Yeah, well, regardless of the merits of that, the issue is that you can actually find a study from the UK, private jets, can the super rich supercharge zero emission aviation? They found in that report that a 4-hour private flight emits as much CO2 as the average person does in a year. So Sewell's and his buddies in the private planes, not exactly green. And that's not even accounting for the tremendous CO2 output of the launch itself, which...
Yeah, space flight is probably not a low CO2 endeavor. We're burning a lot of rocket fuel, a lot of, I believe it's hydrogen and oxygen on the liquid side. So,
yeah, according
or
to
jet fuel a lot of jet fuel in the case of getting it up to altitude in the Branson case. But yeah, not the greenest, is that, Paul? I mean, if you count CO2.
Yeah, and according to Financial Review, another news-oriented website, CO2 emissions per passenger per mile, Virgin Galactic's rocket flight was 12 kilograms, which that's a lot of CO2 emitted per passenger per mile, whereas a business class transatlantic trip from London to New York, 0.2 kilograms of CO2 emitted per mile. And famously, Greta Thunberg refused to fly across the Atlantic. She took her hydrofoil jet-powered boat or whatever it was, solar-powered, I'm sure. Anyway, it's an indicator that when politicians like a particular idea or project, they will do any number of mental gymnastics in order to approve of it, no matter how hypocritical they may be.
Well, and that is an interesting one. Yeah, no matter how hypocritical that he would be such a big supporter of space travel. Why would that be? I don't know. He likes it. So I guess that's the standard.
Well, it could theoretically bring some dollars and cents into his community. And
it certainly extracted some dollars and cents. You know, they've taxed themselves to help build roads and other things for the spaceport. So, yes, maybe he's pleased that maybe they'll get some return out of it.
That is his hope. I am confident of that, and we'll see what shakes loose. But these guys and gals, millionaires and billionaires, paying $250,000 a ticket for a few minutes of weightlessness. I suspect that many of them will not drive to the remote Upham, New Mexico spaceport. These are folks who are going to fly on very costly carbon-emitting private planes, probably not even commercial, as ungreen as that could be. We're talking private planes, only the finest.
Yeah, only the finest, no doubt about it, and it is interesting. This will be a fun one to watch as energy policy unfolds in Santa Fe the coming years.
Yeah. So getting into another story that came up this week, and education is always at the top of the Rio Grande Foundation's agenda. We've got a new project, Opportunities for All Kids, New Mexico, and Edwin Ibar Lopez heading that up to try to achieve some reforms in education here in the state of New Mexico. This week, a article in the Journal said, Native leader blasts New Mexico's response to education lawsuit by Dan McKay. It would have been published in Sunday's newspaper, and it detailed Regis Pecos. He was a governor for the Pueblo of Cochiti. He also, in my personal interactions with him, was really Ben Lujan's, former speaker's right-hand man when he was speaker, and somebody I and a group of other folks met with when we were pushing school choice in the state of New Mexico a decade ago. Now, Pecos recently presented at a legislative finance committee hearing about the Yazzie decision, which is deals with Native Americans and the adequacy of New Mexico's public education system. And Regis Pecos made some claims that I think are pretty self-evident to folks like myself and you and people who study economics and government and public choice theory. He said there's no evidence that dollars received by school districts reach Native students and meet their needs. Now, he's seeing all of this through just the Native American students, but if you look at any of the education spending and some of the remarks made by political leaders, Derek Linte, a state rep from Sandia Pueblo, said that the Native American children have been left to rot because of where they come from for many years. How much longer do our children have to fail for us to get this right? Javier Martinez, someone we've generally seen the opposite sides of many public policy issues from, he called Pecos's presentation a call to action and said he had started to question whether more money is actually needed beyond what we've invested. Shock of shocks, Wally. Money doesn't solve your education woes.
And that is a quite a statement to come from a Democrat. We now have Democrat on Democrat violence with regard to education policy. And Paul, it's really interesting that, is this the beginning of a break with the teachers union power where they're saying, okay, it's not about money. It's okay, we put money in. It's about educational attainment. It's about are our children learning or aren't they? And it's really interesting that we have the Native American community coming out, and very appropriately so. I mean, I think it's appropriate for anyone to come out and with this position, but they're doing it first and foremost because they've gotten more money than anybody because of this ruling. Mm-hmm. And again, not saying that ruling's bad or good. I think it may be justified, but if we're going to spend more money and not get results, then we might need to look a little deeper at what the underlying problem is and work on solving that.
Yeah, and if I was a judge in that case, the term adequacy, and we've gone through this, it really is in the eye of the beholder, but there's no question that New Mexico's K-12 education system is not getting the job done. Now, the question is, what do you do about that? Money, we said at the time, we could have been the Svengali on the shoulders of these legislators saying, this is not going to work.
Right.
And we're still in a condition of untold sums of money being funneled into New Mexico's public education system, not to mention a potential ballot measure for pre-K and expansion of that. This is just going to be the same old. The question will be, ultimately, will legislators be willing to embrace something that the people who get them elected, i.e. the teachers unions who pay the bills, pay the campaign financing, and provide a lot of the muscle, that they ultimately will bite the hand that feeds them. Now, I strongly suspect that will not happen. These politicians will make a stink. They'll say all the right things in committees, and then they won't even consider seriously a bill. Like we have Rebecca Dow on this week as our interview. Rebecca Dow had a school choice bill introduced just this session, and it was killed in the very first committee. I suspect that you're not going to see some magical change after this hearing, but it is the people of New Mexico, again, going to the polls. They have to change direction, and we've yet to see a willingness among the voters to say, we're not going to do the same old thing we've been doing for decades. We're going to change direction and try something different.
Yeah, and then, Paul, I've seen on a national level the trade unions, the guys the men and women that work with their hands predominantly, the Boilermakers and the iron workers, they've broken with traditional Democrat policy because they don't see things being built that they would like to see built. It's interesting to whether that trend could come down to the state level in New Mexico, and if so, how strongly. And your point's well taken. Wringing your hands and then not passing a bill may be all we get, and that lets you kind of have it both ways, which is why we're in the problem we were in with regard to education here in New Mexico.
Yeah, and kind of to tie together a few different topics that we're discussing this afternoon. This really, this cartoon, Trevor, John Trevor of the Journal has. He has always been somebody that I've looked at who really gets New Mexico politics. And we just talked about education. We've talked about the spaceport. Well, Trevor has a cartoon that ran in the Albuquerque Journal in which he has a very simple picture there of, presumably the moon, and it has flights going off behind it. Well, no, actually, it's in New Mexico, so it's not the moon. The sky's awfully dark, but it's black and white. Virgin Galactic going up, and Blue Origin, so Bezos and Branson, and their successes launching their rockets. And then you've got a man with the New Mexico Zia symbol on, which is always the good. This is the New Mexico person writ large with a little rocket there with a couple of kids in it with literacy stamped on it. And this guy's got a handful of boxes of matches and spent matches sitting there, and he's trying to get this rocket to launch up. And this is really, and I wrote a blog post at Heirs of Enchantment in which I talked about how this cartoon is so good that it can be interpreted in multiple ways and really explain the situation of New Mexico. First, it's the private success versus public failure. You have Virgin Galactic, which, while subsidized in certain ways, is also a private enterprise and is getting the job done. Jeff Bezos also getting the job done in even more private sector fashion, and while the public education system is, of course, a government-operated organization. And then the other interpretation is that New Mexico politicians have a tendency to pursue flashy, big expenditures of tax dollars like the spaceport and the mayor soon-to-be discussed soccer stadium. But when it comes to basic things, and unfortunately for us, education is a government function nowadays in every state in the union. But the fact is that when you talk about whether it's education or crime or anything else, government doesn't get the job done in New Mexico. So our politicians, and Keller, I believe, is using this as a diversionary tactic to build support for him on the soccer stadium. We'll talk about that in just a minute, that he would rather propose something new, flashy, and exciting than talk about the lousy job he's doing preventing, solving crimes and homelessness and all those challenges that we face.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I love Trevor. I can't, the thing I love about his cartoons, Paul, is I think there's been one in his entire history, and I think I've seen every one for the last 15 or 20 years that I didn't understand. That's pretty good. So he communicates well, and man, he encapsulates issues like nobody else. So kudos to him on that. So Paul, here's the thing. There was a saying that like a sales manager I used to work with, what you think about, what you talk about, and what you do something about comes about. Well, it's interesting. New Mexico really does not talk much about education except when it comes to how much money that goes into it. And so, to tie this all together, we're seeing the first time now where we're talking about more than just the money. We're talking about the results. And maybe that's the beginning of a wonderful, positive new trend for the state of New Mexico.
Well, it would be great if education policy discussions didn't always focus on just spending more money, and that's the solution. And that is absolutely true. Of course, education is only one of many policy issues that the Rio Grande Foundation tries to keep on top of. And I honestly cut my teeth in college back in Ohio, collecting signatures for a ballot measure to challenge a stadium project in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it had its successes, but now Mayor Keller, with so many challenges facing our city and the area that they are looking at, there are 4 sites under construction, all of which are
under consideration. Right? Yeah.
So they may be under construction soon.
We don't know.
They are all plagued with homelessness and all kinds of potential challenges. Just being downtown alone is something that's going to make certain people less interested in going to games than they would be at the Isotopes Park, which is widely recognized. I mean, it's not just Isotopes Park. The Lobos play across the street, and football, and then the Lobos basketball plays catty corner from that. So it's a well-established venue for all the people to go to. Parking is never an issue. You've got a lot of challenges for a downtown site, but we're talking rail yard, Cole and Broadway, 12th and I-40, which is kind of opposite side of downtown, closer to I-40, of course, and then 2nd and Iron. But all of those locations have serious public safety, not let alone parking and other issues. And we're talking $65 to $70 million is the bottom line. That's initial. That's just stadium. We're not talking property acquiring the properties or parking lots and cost overruns, which are inevitable. I think this is going to be a very expensive proposition, and the mayor wants to rush this thing through at the next city council meeting, put a bond before the voters this fall, and boom, there's your United Stadium. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, and then Paul, I'd like to hear your thoughts and your rationale. I certainly have studied and read about the issue of publicly financed stadiums. The ones that are most noteworthy is making sure that the billionaires that own NFL franchises are well taken care of in cities larger than New Mexico. But, this is a situation. I'm certainly not a hater of New Mexico United soccer, but by the same token, should Albuquerque taxpayers be required to put their money for a stadium of an amount that's so large? And then if you like that, what else should they be required to do? There's this whole thing about what is the form and function of government, and is it to build soccer stadiums? I don't know. That seems like that might be a step too far, but there's certainly a lot of precedent for that in other cities and larger projects. And then, you rightly point out the Isotope Stadium, which interestingly wasn't new. The voters just voted to rehabilitate and upgrade. It was a minor upgrade. They took it down to the ground and built up one. But yeah, these are very interesting issues, very emotional issues. But yeah, it's interesting. If you're, is this the right way to do it, or is there a way that the private sector could make this investment in this stadium if the demand is there for United Soccer? And believe me, they're doing very well right now.
Yeah, they have a good following, and that is wonderful. Certainly, it is hard to see, if they're doing so well, why Isotopes Park is a bad fit for them. It seems like why mess with something that's working? But more importantly, you have
And that's a fantastic facility. Isotopes
Sure.
Park is fantastic.
Yeah, it is a very nice place, and it's a proven place. Unlike downtown,
Right.
where people are willing to go, they feel safe, and I know that is going to be an issue. And they, have the parking, especially. It's green. I know that doesn't really actually matter to 99% of the politicians who claim to be green,
Right.
but building and having one parking lot, and that's the thing, is if you go to the Isotopes Park, well, they have football parking available because there's no football games
Right.
going on. The pit is not being used, so you park at the pit slot. Then you have C&M, which has facilities up and down there. So they're using efficiently large swaths of parking lot. Yes, I mean, parking, I know it's not a particularly green thing, but it's better than having to build completely new parking structures or parking lots or have people parking in neighborhoods that have rampant and serious homelessness issues. And I go through those areas regularly. I went through it on my way here today, Wally. There are serious challenges with that. And in the very same paper in which they talked about, ABQ Journal talked about the mayor's fancy schmancy plans, East Central it says curbing high crime on East Central. That was the article by Colleen Hilde, and it has to do with the inability, apparently, for the city of Albuquerque to get crime under control along Central, up in the Wantabo, Tramway, Eubank area. I mean, really, Central is pretty much a debacle from
Right.
at least the time you leave Nob Hill all the way up to Tramway. There's a few better areas, and this is one of the quotes that I particularly enjoy. So they talk about a McDonald's along Central, and it says, from Tramway to Eubank, the 2-mile stretch of far East Central is peppered with closed businesses, sometimes aggressive transients, open displays of illegal drug use, mental illness, vandalism, and trash, area residents say. Now, that same statement could be applied to downtown and numerous other areas of our city. But it goes on to say, and this is the part I really like, the McDonald's that stands today is one of the corridor's cleanest properties. It's patrolled by a private security guard who is quick to escort loiterers out the door or, as reported recently, respond to a woman who is taking off her clothes outside in broad daylight. Private policing. Now, that's libertarian fantasyland stuff
yes.
right there. But the fact is that the only one of the few bastions of safety along that area of Central is actually policed privately, which is an indicator that maybe we need to do something differently from what we're doing. I'm all for hiring more cops. I'm all for the city hiring private officers as well. Obviously, governance issues are a problem to boot. The fact is that we have serious issues. And what does our mayor want to spend money on? Not dealing with the serious stuff, the basic stuff the government actually is supposed to do. He wants to build a fancy new stadium.
Yeah, and it's one of these things, Paul. It's maybe this is the parent coming out of me. It's like, can you go have fun and do what you want to do? Yes, but you need to clean up your room first. It's like, is the thought somehow that putting this there will help clean up downtown? When, it wasn't that, it was just a few weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, they announced a new initiative to try to clean up downtown. Well, believe me, I talked to a business owner, family-owned operation that operates on Central in the downtown area, and he assures me that there is still work to be done. I know you have an office down there that you go to from time to time, and sometimes it's more of an adventure than you would care to have. And so maybe deal with, what do we say, first things first before we do that. And then back to the point, is this the right thing for the city to invest in, or could we find a way to have the private sector do this, which is, again, I know that's not how we do things in New Mexico. Nothing is more successful than having other people's money fund your business, a la the film industry. But maybe this is a minor version of that as well.
Yeah, and we recognize, and the isotopes, for starters, had been a going concern for many years, decades, with the Dukes. There was a partnership there. It wasn't just where the taxpayers were going to come in and spend all the money to build you a stadium. I haven't seen any details about what money the New Mexico United are pledging to put forth for this particular facility. So those are discussions that need to be had, and folks need to reach out to their city councilors and make sure that they know that people are watching. This is all in an election year. We need Manny Gonzalez to come out and put his, what his ideas are about this particular issue up for discussion. And really, we need to have a very robust discussion if this is really the highest and best use of our limited resources at the city of Albuquerque at this particular stage. And I'm not somebody, and let's also talk about, I just mentioned the spaceport and Bezos and Branson. I'm talking specifically about them and their resources. These are individuals. They have money and they can, by and large, and should be able to do whatever the heck they want to. And yes, there's going to be hunger and there's going to be poverty and there's going to be issues. But when it comes to private people using their own money, they should have the freedom to do something neat and I think beneficial for the public. At least it's not just throwing his money away. Lord knows Bezos in particular spends a lot of money on left-wing special interest groups and whatnot. So the idea of private space flights for the masses is something that could be a reality, and Bezos and Branson are both contributing to that, and that is really awesome. That's different from government. Government, their role is to use your money to do the basics, and maybe if they have done all the basics, they've got crime under control, they've done public safety,
education, all of our kids can read.
Then we can talk about fancy stadium projects and other issues that need to be addressed. But Lord knows this is way, way, way down the priority list for our city at this point. And I don't know.
And you don't have to have an answer. I'm going to put you on the spot here, but the question came up in my mind, and I'll ask myself the question. I don't have an answer to it. What's better economically? I'm not saying what's good or what has a positive return, but how does something like this stadium stack up against our film subsidy? I realize they're different pots of money potentially. And, frankly, I don't have the answer, but it seems like this might be better. But here's the thing. It's not a trade-off. Are they going to cut back subsidies to the millionaires of Hollywood to build this stadium? No, this is just more money we're going to spend that could have gone elsewhere. It could have gone into the roads, could have gone into streetlights, sewers, fixing potholes, more police, you name it. It could have gone lots of places, but they're saying, no, we're not going to do more of those. We're going to build a stadium.
Yeah, I can't answer that question. That is an impossible question to answer because they're so different. And we really don't know if what they're doing with the film industry is sustainable. Of course, the state has all that oil and gas money that comes in. And unfortunately, there's very few strings attached to it. The politicians get to spend it however they want. And the film industry is one of many ways that the lack of accountability is exposed in terms of that money. Now, locally, that is theoretically closer to the people. This is our property tax that's going to go up or not be
not go down.
Not go down.
Your property taxes will not increase.
These are potholes that won't be filled. Keller's going to bend over backwards to say that this is not a new tax or something. Well, money is fungible. City of Albuquerque has raised plenty of taxes. We, of course, have all kinds of buku bucks coming in from the Biden bucks stimulus. That's not what they were envisioning. That's not what's supposed to be happening. So the fact is that our city is failing to do the very basic job of protecting its citizens and to reduce crime and to improve the outcomes for the residents of our city. A soccer stadium, specifically for a soccer team, located in an area that is very troubled, and I've spent time in areas that were recently gentrified or that are homes to stadiums. Stadiums may do a limited amount to actually improve an area. And I went to Denver, for example, before the Rockies area. But Denver's a booming area. There's all kinds of young people moving in there. Now there's new problems that have arisen in Denver. But I went to Redskins games, Washington football team games in the DC area at RFK Stadium. And that area was not very successful, and it had a lot of challenge. Now that stadium's been there for a while, but a new stadium shouldn't be any different from an economic impact of an old stadium. What I'm saying is that you rely on external forces relative to that sports team to actually improve the local area. And I really do have fears. If I was Peter Trevisani of the United, I would not be excited about a downtown stadium. I realize the politics, and he thinks that this is appealing to the kind of liberal, progressive-minded fan base of a soccer team in the city of Albuquerque. Certainly something the mayor's pushing for. But I think he's actually playing a very high-risk game with his own soccer franchise that is doing very well at its current site and shows no signs of that abating. And instead, getting all this money spent on his behalf for a facility that, among other things, could be tough to get to and whatnot, but definitely has some safety issues I think are going to scare off a fair amount of the fan base. So interesting stuff, and we'll see how it goes, but we'll definitely be involved in trying to push back against the latest waste of your tax dollars by the city of Albuquerque. And we'll leave it there. Any final thoughts there, Wally?
Well, Paul, just as we talk about this issue, I think in terms of downtown, there's a chicken and egg situation. So if you have a successful downtown, does that make it more likely then that when you put a stadium there, that the stadium will be successful? And I think by and large, I think that's the case.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that a stadium in and of itself is going to bail out downtown Albuquerque. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, whether or not that stadium goes in. So that's my final thought on that, I guess.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, if you get the wind in the sails in a particular city, you can do a lot of revitalization with or without a stadium. But a stadium alone is not going to solve the problems, and that's just reality. All right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or have your Google Home play Tipping Point, New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.